In the world of thoroughbred racing, where yearlings sell for 7 figures and pedigree is treated like sacred scripture, a horse standing 14.3 hands tall wasn't a prospect, he was a punchline. The bloodstock agents had a word for animals like him, several words, actually. None of them were kind. In auction houses from Keeneland to Tattersall's, buyers walked past his stall the way commuters walk past the man playing violin in a subway station, present, unmoved, already elsewhere in their minds. He was the wrong height, the wrong build, from the wrong bloodline at the wrong moment in a sport that had spent 2 centuries engineering what right was supposed to look like, and yet, the ledger tells a different story. The stopwatch, that merciless, indifferent instrument that has no interest in your opinions or your breeding charts, tells a different story entirely. To understand what this horse did, you first have to understand what 14.3 hands means in the context of elite flat racing. A hand is 4 inches. 14.3 hands puts a horse at 59 inches at the withers, the ridge between the shoulder blades, the standard measurement point. The average stakes caliber thoroughbred stands between 15.2 and 16.1 hands. That gap isn't cosmetic. Every additional inch of height corresponds, in theory, to a longer stride. A longer stride means more ground covered per footfall. More ground per footfall means, at equivalent stride frequency, more speed. This is not opinion, this is geometry. Racing's entire selective breeding apparatus for the past 200 years has been built, in significant part, around this geometric logic. He violated it, completely, systematically, race after race, season after season, against horses who had been specifically engineered to beat animals exactly like him. The veterinarians who evaluated him early didn't mince words. His pasterns sat at an angle that suggested fragility under load. His shoulder slope, the angle that determines how far forward a front leg can reach per stride, measured at the shallow end of acceptable. One evaluation report, reviewed years later, used the phrase "not recommended for competitive purchase." Not a red flag, a verdict. The examiner had looked at this animal with professional eyes, applied professional standards, and concluded that the machine was not built for the work being asked of it. The trainer who eventually took him on did so for reasons that had more to do with stubbornness than science. He'd seen the animal move, not in a formal setting, in a paddock, on an unremarkable Tuesday morning, with no one watching and nothing at stake. And what he saw didn't match the paperwork. There was something in the way the horse covered ground that resisted easy categorization. Not elegant, exactly. Not the fluid, reaching motion that confirmation judges rewarded. Something more mechanical, more relentless, as if the animal had found some private efficiency that the conventional measurements hadn't thought to look for. He kept him. Everyone thought it was sentiment. It wasn't. The first workouts confirmed what the paddock had hinted at. His stride length, as predicted, was shorter than his rivals, measurably, verifiably shorter, by an average of 14 inches per stride in early time trials. 14 inches. Against horses covering 6 feet of ground per footfall, he was covering 5 feet and 2 inches. On paper, this was a structural deficit that no amount of training could correct. Bone is bone, geometry is geometry. The industry experts watching the clockings shook their heads with the quiet satisfaction of people who had been right about something. What they weren't measuring was stride frequency. While the $1 million horses took 3 strides to accelerate through the opening furlong, he took 4. While they peaked at a sustainable cadence somewhere around 135 strides per minute, he operated at 154. The difference sounds mechanical until you consider what it demands metabolically, because sustaining that frequency isn't just a matter of wanting to move faster, it requires a cardiovascular system operating at a different level of output. It requires oxygen delivery that most horses, regardless of size, cannot maintain past the half-mile mark without catastrophic lactic acid accumulation. His rivals were built like long-haul freight trains, powerful, efficient over distance, designed to sustain. He was built like something else entirely. The anxiety arrived on the morning of his 3rd stakes appearance. The veterinary report from the previous race had flagged something, not an injury, but a stress pattern in the left front cannon bone consistent with cumulative load fatigue. The trainer held the report for a long time. He'd entered a horse that the attending veterinarian had quietly, professionally, and correctly identified as a candidate for catastrophic breakdown. The question wasn't whether the animal could run. The question was whether the skeleton holding him together could survive what his engine demanded of it. He ran. The decision was not made lightly. The gates opened at 2:30 on a track that had been baked dry by 6 days without rain. Hard going, the kind of surface that punishes horses with irregular stride mechanics because the ground doesn't give, doesn't absorb, simply returns every ounce of force directly back up through the hoof and into the bone column above it. For a horse already flagged for cannon bone stress, this was the worst possible condition. The field broke cleanly. 7 horses, all of them taller, all of them more expensive, most of them trained by men whose names appeared regularly in the sport's leading statistics. He broke last. Not by design, simply because at 14.3 hands, the geometry of a starting gate, built for larger animals, placed him at a mechanical disadvantage the moment the latch released. He lost 2 lengths before the first marker. The gap widened through the opening quarter, his rivals settling into their powerful, long-striding rhythm while he churned behind them at his frenetic, abbreviated cadence. From the stands, it looked like a mismatch. From the clocker's position, something was already wrong with that narrative. At the half-mile mark, he had reclaimed 1 length. At 5 furlongs, he was level with the trailing group. The track should have been destroying him, every stride compressing that stressed cannon bone against unyielding dirt, demanding more from a structural system that had already been questioned. Yet he accelerated. The gap between his cadence and his rival's cadence, which had meant nothing in the early going, now meant everything. Where their engines were running at their ceiling, his had another register available. Where they were sustaining, he was still building. He hit the front 80 yards from the line, not with a surge. Surges are dramatic, visible, the kind of thing cameras capture cleanly. He simply moved through the field the way a current moves through water. One moment he was behind, then he was alongside. Then, with a finality that silenced the section of stands that had bet heavily against him, he was clear. He crossed the line 2 lengths in front of the favourite, a horse who had sold at auction for 43 times the price paid for him, and the clocker's hands, for just a moment, stopped moving. The number they'd recorded didn't make sense with what they'd watched. When the post-race examination was conducted, the attending veterinarian's instruments lingered on 2 findings. The first was the cannon bone, miraculously, structurally intact, the stress pattern neither worsened nor complicated by what the animal had just endured. The second finding was in the chest cavity. Lung volume, measured through post-exertion respiratory assessment, came back at a figure that prompted a second measurement, then a third. The average stakes thoroughbred processes between 1,800 and 2,000 litres of air per minute at peak exertion. His capacity registered closer to 2,400. Not a statistical outlier, an anatomical argument. What his skeleton couldn't provide in leverage, his respiratory system provided in raw fuel delivery. He wasn't compensating for his size. He had been, from birth, operating on a different energy economy than every horse he'd ever been compared against. The industry experts who had passed on him, who had written the evaluation reports, who had shaken their heads at the morning clockings, they were not unintelligent men. They had simply been asking the right questions of the wrong measurements. They measured what they could see. They missed what was happening inside. He ran 11 more times that year. He won 9. The 2 races he didn't win came on soft going, the one surface type where his high-frequency stride lost its mechanical advantage, where the ground swallowed the energy he was trying to return. On firm ground, on hard ground, on the kind of track that punished everyone else, he was something the sport had no clean vocabulary for. Not a prodigy, not a fluke, a solution to a problem that racing hadn't known it was posing. The breeding farms were not interested in him afterward. He was too small to pass on the stride length the market demanded. His bloodline was too obscure to carry commercial weight. The very qualities that had made him extraordinary on the track were, by the sport's reproductive logic, inadmissible. He never sired a champion. He was retired to a small property with no ceremony, and no plaque. Somewhere, in a filing cabinet that has probably been digitized by now, there is a veterinary evaluation that marked him not recommended for competitive purchase. The man who wrote it was not wrong about the bone angles or the shoulder slope or the pastern geometry. He was measuring everything accurately. What he couldn't measure was the furnace burning behind those ribs, the fuel delivery system that made the geometry irrelevant, the private arithmetic that a 14.3-hand animal had worked out between himself and the ground beneath him. The data is stored in databases now. The times are verified. The biology has been reviewed, and yet something about what he did in those races resists the spreadsheet, resists the neat reduction of stride length and lung volume and cadence ratios. Perhaps the truest things in racing exist not in what the instruments record, but in what they circle around, in the space between the measurement and the motion, in the gap between what we were certain couldn't happen and the Tuesday morning when it did.